My name is Greg Rusin, and I'm a faculty member at the School of Film and Television at Loyola Marymount University. And I'm here this afternoon with Chris Jones, our filmmaker for the film Junk. And Chris, it's really a great pleasure to have you here with us today and to spend a little time talking with you about your film and also about the filmmaking and also about other things that you're working on now. One of the things I'll just say right out of the gate, when I started watching the film the other day, I watched it with my son, who's 10, and just want you to know that he was immediately captivated by the film.
Okay.
And I think that at his age, it's a 10-year-old, we do a lot of things to try to make sure he's environmentally aware. And so I thought the film, because it's kind of an adventure story, but woven in is also the story of the oceans and what the perils they face. I really thought, the audience, it really grabbed him, even a kid who might not normally seem to be the ideal audience for your film. So I just wanted you to know that right out of the gate. So
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, my aunt teaches at a middle school in Sacramento, and one of the first screenings we did of the film, she asked me to come and bring it, and we did a few sessions with fifth, sixth, seventh graders, eighth graders, yeah, it was super fun. I think it's sort of like interweaving the sort of adventure story with the activism. I mean, they're kind of, it was hard to kind of, it was difficult to find balance there, but yeah, I don't know, we were kind of focusing on more of like a young adult audience.
Well, I think if my son is any indication, and it sounds like those audiences too, then I think you've succeeded. And I think that's a testament to your filmmaking ability and your ability to write, because ultimately a documentary is all about writing. So maybe if you could talk for just a minute or two about sort of how this project happened. Before we started recording, you mentioned, this is just something I was working on in the garage. So tell me like, how did this movie happen, right? And then what were the sort of the particular challenges that you would have faced as the film director?
Sure. So I got interested in plastic pollution when I was a graduate student at LMU. I think the best professor I had, the best interaction I had with a staff member at the school was Professor Arthur Dong. I had a documentary development class with him, and then a documentary production class. And he's just sort of a kind of a legend in the Bay Area sort of doc scene, and just very storied filmmaker. And so I worked with Marcus, the main subject of Junk. He was on a film just as a project for class, and I had heard about there's this trash island the size of Texas in the Pacific Ocean, and I was like, oh man, it's so weird. We keep hearing about this thing, but we don't ever see any imagery of it. It'd be cool to go out there. And so I kind of approached him and approached Marcus. I looked up his nonprofit online, Five Gyres, and ended up talking with him, and he was really open and just like, hey man, there's this, this narrative keeps getting perpetuated. It's like an island, a trash island really catches people's attention, but it's a way more systemic issue than that. And it's, there isn't an island, but it's, these microplastics are kind of spread throughout the water column, across all of our oceans. And so I made a film with him about microplastic beads that they discovered in Lake Michigan, because they were, it's hard to trace plastics when you're out in the ocean in a marine environment. So they figured, let's go to a landlocked body of water where maybe it'll be easier to trace these things back to their source, and hold those that design them accountable. So we had some success with that film, and a couple of years later, I moved in with Marcus. They had a little guest house in their backyard, and I was paying $300 a month for the last 3 years, just unprecedented for Los Angeles. And he just approached me and was like, hey man, I have this box of 300 hours from that junk raft trip. We don't have any money, but maybe you could like kind of pick through it and try to like put something together. Because he published a book, Junk Raft, that came out. I think it was on Beacon Press, like 2018. It came out. Really fantastic book, and he just wanted something to kind of accompany the book, and so he was thinking like a 5-minute thing, and then as we started getting into it, I was like, dude, I don't think we're going to be able to really encapsulate what you accomplished in 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
So we were working in the garage at the house for over a year, and yeah, it was just sort of a labor of love. I mean, it was one of those things, like we didn't talk about in school. We didn't talk enough about creating a business model and grant writing and fundraising, and so there's a little bit of not hubris, but it's just sort of like, oh, like screw it, we can make do with nothing and just make it happen. And I think having done that a couple times now, it's sort of like, yeah, like I'm not like, if the right project comes along, whatever. But it's sort of like, I mean, you have to take care of yourself. You deserve a salary. You deserve to be paid for your work. And so I would definitely approach that angle of things differently. We ended up getting a small grant for like $10,000 that we put towards music, a few of the animation elements that you saw in the film, and that was about it. Maybe some film festivals and stuff, but
wow, but I love this. You mentioned you had 300 hours. So I was going to ask. So one of the challenges with documentary filmmaking is you go out, you gather an immense amount of material, and then you try to winnow it down and create some meaning out of it. So boy, and I've been wondering in this case because I noticed you weren't on the boat with them, so I knew that. I was like, okay, so they must have been. So you were basically pouring through 300 hours of things that they had watched or had videotaped on the voyage, and then trying to figure out what to do with it. Wow, that's amazing. That is a big job.
I was impressed with their coverage a lot of the time for certain like scenes. I like there's this one moment. I'm forgetting. Marcus was doing something up in the sails, and Joel had two cameras going. He was double fisting two, like, and this was all like consumer grade sort of like most of it wasn't even HD. But he had like two cameras. He had a wide and like a close up on Marcus at the same time. Marcus took a picture of him. So there were some times where Marcus he had a television show on the Weather Channel called Commando Weather. For I think it was like one season, but so I think he'd been in front of the camera a lot. So he was very much aware of just the need to, I mean, there were literally things where they would restage things a couple times too. And just because he's like, oh, like I messed up like that line, like let's run it again. And then Joel's like, dude, come on, like this is whatever. Anyways.
So then you ended up scripting some voiceover for them as well, right? So the narration is something that came, or did you pull that from their?
Yeah, so all of that. So I mean, this was largely based on the structure of Marcus's book. So I Marcus and I worked directly with one another, kind of going through a few different iterations of the narration. And yeah, that was a process. I mean, there was stuff we changed, pretty close to. I mean, there's always going to be something you're going to want to change. I mean, most filmmakers, I don't think there's anyone I've ever met who produced a product, even that they were really pleased with, where they were like, there wasn't something that they wanted to go back and change in retrospect or like update or tinker with. So eventually you just have to kind of like let it go and let it go out into the world.
Well, yeah, that connects to this. I don't know who said this, so I'm not even going to attempt to find the source, but somebody once said that that no film is ever finished; they're merely slowly abandoned.
That's right.
So there's a point where you're saying, but I think, and now that I have been drifted a bit into documentary filmmaking myself, struggling to complete a film now, yeah, you reach a point where, wow, we could tinker with this forever. right? But and I think nothing is ever perfect, but you're right. The idea is solid. Maybe it's time to see if it flies. So, well, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing a little of the story, how that going. One of the things I was struck by the quote right out at the gate from Don Quixote. When I saw that, it reminded me of something that an interview that my brother had forwarded to me years ago. It was one of Jacques Cousteau's last interviews that he gave before he passed, in which he told this story of how one day he went out into Paris and he walked around Paris with a little clicker, like a little counter thing, like when people come into the theater. And every time he passed a billboard or a sign or something that was trying to sell him something that wasn't necessary for life, he would click this clicker, right? And so by the end of the day of walking around Paris, then it numbered into thousands.
Oh, sure.
So in the point he was getting to is this idea of like, how do you resist? Like, we see these plastics, like you're saying, the problem that junk illustrates so beautifully. But how do you begin to stop that when everywhere you go, you're assailed by this message? And he ultimately came down near the end of his life to talk about how in his thinking, consumer culture that was the true enemy of the planet. And it sounds like Marcus and the gentleman who did junk, it sounds like they're probably on the same page with Jacques Cousteau in that, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, well, so the Don Quixote quote, that Don Quixote, that was one of about 5 books that Marcus brought with him.
Yeah, I saw
And
that.
like they like they talk about the journey ended up taking 4 times what they thought it was or it was going to. So he read Don Quixote like 4 times, I think. But yeah, he actually approached me with the quote. But
Okay.
yeah, it's the culture that we're indoctrinated in. It's sort of like that's a part of being like a capitalist consumerist. It's sort of I mean, that's how we make a living. Like that's how it's marketing. There's the whole wing of people who are responsible for marketing products. And then, there's the design and production, delivery. I mean, that's what our whole economy is based on. So I think it's just helping people realize, or, or at least helping people maybe try to aspire to kind of close the circle, close the loop a little bit, both in terms of like where their waste goes, but also in terms of, I guess uh, the range. I guess it's sort of like just trying to keep things a little more locally, like keeping things in a closed loop, trying to like even with respect to your produce or whatever, like trying to buy things locally, source things locally. Because I mean, I think it's sort of, you look at like in small rural communities. Like I grew up in a pretty small town, um, um, but when you have like a supermarket down the street, when you have Sprouts or Whole Foods or whatever, I mean, you don't really think about the source of any of this stuff. Like there are certain commodities, or like Trader Joe's is a good one too. Like their packaging is horrendous, but it's sort of like, oh, but like I love their like hash browns, those like little it's sort of like, oh, like it becomes a thing that you rely on and it's a part of your diet. And you don't really think there's an impact or anything like that, but it's sort of like, I don't know, like these potatoes are from like across the globe or something like that. And just think like the carbon footprint to like get those hash browns to you, and then the packaging and all this stuff. It's just sort of like, I mean, but you look at the original Angelinos or whatever, like the Gabrielino, the Tongva, the Shumash or whatever, like they just, they make do with what they have available to them. And I guess when you have this exchange, I think like globalization, like the exchange of ideas that have been allowed, and like Zoom calls and stuff allows, like you can engage with anybody, anywhere, share ideas. But like, I don't know, we develop these reliances on products or foods or whatever it is that we don't necessarily need, and there's just this big sort of burden that's sort of kind of hidden from view. That I mean, most companies, um, yeah, I mean, most companies aren't taxed or in any way for their carbon footprint or something
Mhm.
like that. Like, um, and but they'll reap these big profits. So it's just sort of like, you know, Amazon, like Jeff Bezos wouldn't be a billionaire if his company had to pay for the impact that it was having on our planet, whether it's the packaging uh, oil or fossil fuel emissions or whatever, or like paying your workers a living wage, like all that stuff. Like, yeah, billionaires wouldn't exist.
I really thought that was a point that was beautifully made in the film, and where you call out more than once in the film about how the true cost of this convenience just seems to be lost, or not dealt with, or not considered. This, and I think that's really a powerful message that we need to be thinking, as you articulate in the film, about the whole lifespan of these materials and these things that we're using. And I've not studied the history of plastic that widely, but I just know you think about it was hailed as the miracle material that would last forever. And which is an amazing thing. But then what do we use it for? Disposable stuff. I mean, it just, there's like a massive disconnect there, and the planet pays the price ultimately, right? So,
Yeah, it's certainly more convenient, um, and it seems more economical. Like again, when you're not taking those, like, you know, we talk about negative externalities in the film. You know, when those factors aren't taken into consideration, it is more convenient and inexpensive. You know, uh, at the kind of the early life of the product, but then, you know, I don't know. You see the evidence in, like that fish or you know, whatever it is. I think there's videos, like I see videos like that all the time, like fishermen all over the world, like cutting open a mahi mahi or something, and it's just totally loaded with plastic. I think it's nothing. It's like an everyday thing now. I think there's statistics that, you know, there are more plastic particles than there are living organisms in our oceans at this point. It's sort of like, um, it's just like, it's like whoa, because Marcus talked about,
it's astounding.
he met with this guy, who did the same trip. They took the same route from LA to Hawaii on a little raft, back in the 50s. And Marcus met with this guy, and he's like, yeah, man, like, you know, you're going to be catching fish the whole way, and you're always going to have plenty to eat. And you know, like a couple weeks into the trip, they hadn't really caught anything, and they didn't see much life at all. And then, so it's interesting that they're kind of on this, they're on a lifeboat, they're on this little tiny island, and you realize just sort of you have to make do with whatever's available. And, you know, I guess we're all on a little island in our own way, and it's just sort of like, it's just a little more spread out, so we don't really perceive the impacts and those needs and things like that. But um, yeah, it's just the way the ocean had changed just in those few decades too is a pretty strong indication of, you know, not just plastic pollution but other stuff too, overfishing and
Years ago, I used to spend some time in Maine, and I met some. So this was probably even 20 years ago now, and I met some guys in a town called Friendship, Maine, who were lobster fishermen. But they would also do other kinds of fishing. And they were telling me, some of these a bit older guys, they were telling me, oh yeah, you know, it used to be, their dads would tell them when they were really young, they would go out fishing off into the Gulf of Maine, and, you know, they would go a mile offshore and catch bluefin tuna and big fish. Now, they launch an expedition. Somebody will go out, they have to go 60 miles offshore, and they'll be out there for 2 months and maybe not even catch a fish. And if they do, obviously, they might catch a really big one that's worth tons and tons of money in Japan, and it somehow makes it worth it. But to hear, I'll never forget these guys telling me, like, they used to joke, their grandfathers, that there were so many fish in the Gulf of Maine you could walk on their backs. Right? That's not a world we're going to see anymore. Well, hey, listen, my son had a question, and you kind of related to it, and then I'm going to ask you one final follow-up. We could love to talk all day, but I don't think people would want to listen to us. I'll talk all day, maybe. Um, but my son was wondering why they chose to go from Long Beach all the way to Hawaii. Why not a shorter voyage? Because he was like, that's really dangerous and a long way. So, what do you know what motivated them to be like, okay, that's the voyage we're taking? What was the inspiration there? Do you know?
Yeah, so the thing that kind of started the whole like this awareness about plastic pollution, there's this guy named Charlie Moore, who I think is mentioned in the film briefly. Captain Charlie Moore raced sailboats. That's something he did, and he was coming back from a race from LA to Hawaii. I forget what the race is called, but he decided to take a detour and kind of motor through the middle of the gyre. Um, and he was the first person to kind of document this large concentration of debris and waste, and plastic that was kind of degrading out there. They noted stuff from Japan and from Alaska, from South Africa, like it was coming from all over the place. Um, so he started a research institute called Algalita, and they were kind of the first organization that was doing research into marine plastic pollution. And so the North Pacific Gyre is a subtropical gyre, just situated right above Hawaii there. So I think it was just sort of like Camilo Beach in Hawaii is just loaded with plastic pollution. So I think it was just sort of, it was kind of at the epicenter of this like newfound environmental issue. That I think people were kind of aware of, but I think, but that image of like people character incorrectly, but like but that's what it took for people to like to go back home and look at their beach and be like, oh wait, like, oh no, it's everywhere, it's here. So I think that's where it all started. So I think that's kind of why they picked Hawaii.
Okay, I'll make sure my son knows that. And he obviously living in Southern California, so the Pacific Ocean is right there, very present.
Oh yeah.
Well, hey, you mentioned as we begin to work our way out, you mentioned your earlier film, Trash Manufacturer, which was sort of the film that introduced you to these characters and this science and this issue. Is that an area that you think, so now we could say, hey, Chris is an environmental filmmaker in some ways, obviously not trying to pigeonhole you, you can do other things, but is this then an area of filmmaking that you're wanting to continue working in? Are you working on anything exciting now that you could share with us? And also, is there a way that an audience member who saw Junk and was inspired by your work could see Trash Manufacturer? If you could maybe speak a little, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So when I came to film school, I didn't really have any interest in making documentaries at all. And I think I was relatively aware, like just as of certain environmental issues, just as like a conscious citizen who likes to spend a lot of time in the outdoors. And but that short film kind of changed the course of my career and my aspirations altogether. It was just sort of it was amazing to me, how many great stories there are, how many essential stories there are all around us that just really need to be told. And it was also kind of cool how empowered people were to just open up to me just because I had a camera. I mean, you have to build trust with people to even just show up. That's generally annoying. Like that closes people down. But like when you do your research and you build relationships with people, I mean, depending on the subject matter, they open their world to you, and then it's your job. I mean, you're not telling their story. You're just sort of like, you're kind of helping them. You're helping them kind of access it for themselves even. I mean, yeah, like there's some writing and stuff involved in the editing process. It's sort of like your hand is definitely in it, but it's just sort of like, it's giving people a voice who wouldn't really sort of have that outlet otherwise. Not all the time. I mean, there's like high profile, or, you know, like whatever, like the David Attenborough doc that just came out. Like, he's a pretty high profile guy. Like everybody knows David Attenborough, yeah, I think I would be fine aligning myself as sort of a like environmental filmmaker. I always kind of say like environmental and social justice are like kind of that's sort of my bent, because they're interwoven, but they're not mutually exclusive necessarily. But I'm currently working on a film about with Steve Ulacki, who was the former dean of the LMU Film School. We're working on a film about Christian nationalism. It's this sort of so it's not environmental, but it's this sort of ideology that the United States was founded as a Christian nation, and the intention that all the founding fathers were Christians, and the kind of goal, the end goal of these generally like conservative evangelical Republicans is to sort of shift the bent of our government towards a more kind of theocratic, dominionist type of structure, which is very problematic for many reasons. So it's so this is a new territory for me, big time. So we're in production on that right now, and then we're developing another feature with an LMU alum, former Representative Tony Coelho, who graduated LMU back in the 60s. He was the Senate Majority Whip in the House of Representatives for several years, and I think he served 6 terms. He's from I'm forgetting the district, and he was the first sponsor of the Americans with Disabilities Act in Congress, and he was the first congressman ever with a disability to kind of talk about it openly in a joint session of Congress. So we're kind of working with him on a project that's sort of, the first part is kind of focusing on the passage of that bill, and then the second part is kind of looking at the contemporary disability rights movement. So again, like nothing related to plastic pollution in the works right now, but I've got a little short about the Bionic Creek watershed that I've been trying to develop for a couple of years that I'm still trying to make some headway with. Well,
great. Thanks for sharing those new projects with us. We'll look forward to seeing them. And as you were saying, social justice and environmentalism go hand in hand quite often. And so I don't think, even though you've drifted a little bit off of plastic pollution, you're still working on things that are profound and about the issues that we are all facing, right, ultimately. So listen, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to say thank you very, very much for being with us today, and thank you for sharing junk with us in the festival and with the audience. And I'll just say thanks again, and really look forward to seeing the future work when it comes.